I want to remind everyone that the seat we're talking about tonight is CA-47, which is the seat that is currently held by Katie Porter. And of course, she has decided to vacate that seat because she is running for Senate next year in 2024. The Cook Political Report has rated CA-47 as lean Democrat. So a quick intro of Dave Min. He began his career as an enforcement attorney at the Securities and Exchange Commission. He went on to serve as an economic and financial policy advisor for Senator Chuck Schumer, and then as economic policy director at the Center for American Progress. Prior to his election to the California State Senate, Dave was an assistant law professor at UC Irvine. He focused on the law and policy of banking, capital markets, and real estate finance. He has testified in front of Congress several times, including about the impact of Dodd-Frank financial regulations. In 2020, Dave was elected to the California State Senate. He is currently the chair of the Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee. The overlap between his current State Senate district and Congressional District 47 is approximately 80%. With that, I welcome State Senator Min. The floor is yours to make a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Katharine. Thank you, California Grassroots Alliance, and to the South Bay Indivisible Network. Really appreciate you guys and how organized you are. I got a Google Doc ahead of this that was very much on point with timing and details, and not every event that we go to is as meticulously planned as this one. So kudos to you, Patty and Tom, for all your work. So thank you for the kind introduction, Katharine. My name is Dave Min, and I am running to succeed Katie Porter. And I say succeed, not replace, because let's be honest, she's pretty irreplaceable. And I wanted to just tell you a little bit about how I came to be running for this seat, because believe it or not, back in 2016, I very much thought I would never run for any political office of any kind. Katharine mentioned that I had worked for Senator Schumer in the Center for American Progress. I was on the policy side, and I saw up close what call time looked like when you call people for money. I saw Chuck Schumer do it, and I thought to myself, you'd have to be insane to want to take that on. I also didn't think I'd ever be good at it. I was terrible at selling magazines as a kid. My very first paid gig ever in life was selling Cutco knives, and I sold 2 sets. One was to my parents, and the other was to their good friends. They're very good knives, by the way. They really do sell themselves. But when you're a shy kid who's not really into asking people for things, which was how I described myself for most of my life, it's not natural. And I didn't do debate club, didn't do Model UN. Very much saw myself as someone who was in the business of trying to develop and craft important policy around banking and economics. And as Katharine mentioned, I started my career at the SEC. I don't mean to seem like I'm just following in Katie Porter's footsteps, but I was a year behind her at Harvard Law School. I worked with her for almost 8 years at UC Irvine, and she actually recruited me there. And now I'm running for her seat. So how did I end up being here? And I'd say that part of this goes back to my identity as a Korean American, which is to say that my parents grew up during the Korean War and the aftermath of that conflict. And this was at a time when Korea was dirt poor, devastated by an internal conflict that killed 10% of all Koreans. They grew up they tell me stories later about how they grew up being lucky to have any protein, like an egg. You may not know this, but one of the reasons that Spam is so popular in Korea and a lot of Asian countries today is because it was the only source of protein often for people of my parents' generation. The GI's leftover rations. And so today, if you go to Korea, you'll see like gold-plated Spam. They've really made a cottage industry out of this meat byproduct, or whatever you want to call it. But that's part of who I am. And so my parents came over here in 1971 on a scholarship, no money in their pockets for their graduate studies. They got married out here. They had me and then my younger brother, Andrew. They moved out to California just before I turned 3 years old. And as my dad tells the story, he was debating on whether he should take the family back to Korea. He had a couple offers out there to be a professor. But he took an interview with Lockheed Martin, or I guess it was Lockheed back then, to be a satellite engineer. And after the interview, which he thought went pretty well, he drove about 30 minutes to the beach. And the way he describes it, so it sounds very romanticized, but he bought himself a fish sandwich from a vendor, took off his shoes and socks, and ate the sandwich while he put his feet in the water and watched the sunset. And of course, after that, he said, I can never leave California. Brought the family out here. My mom was an engineer in the semiconductor industry, which was just starting at the time. And I can tell you that, she ran into glass and what we call bamboo ceilings throughout her career. But despite the challenges that my family faced, it was always internalized in me that we literally owed everything we had to this country, that I would not be standing here before you today or sitting before you, but for the sacrifices of 36,000 American GIs, fighting far from home for abstract concepts like democracy and freedom and opportunity. And these were values and promises that people like my parents got to grow up with because of those sacrifices. I and my brother really are the embodiment of the American dream. I'm a Harvard-educated law professor, now state senator. My brother's a Stanford-educated doctor, and we embody everything that we talk about when we talk about what this country can at its best do. And I think that's why I spent my career in public service, is why I turned down Goldman Sachs at the beginning of my career to go to the SEC, because I wanted to serve my country right after the Enron and WorldCom accounting scandals, right after 9/11. And that began a career in public service for me, as Katharine mentioned. I went on to work for Schumer, then the Center for American Progress, before getting an amazing offer to come back home to California to teach at a brand new law school that had been started by Erwin Chemerinsky. And, Katie Porter, someone I kind of vaguely was familiar with at the time, being there helped as well. And so flash forwarding to 2016, I really, again, was kind of set in my ways. I was doing what I thought was cool work, dream job. I testified 6 times before Congress. My work at that point in time was being quoted in places like the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. I was a regular guest on CNBC and NPR. I was an occasional guest on MSNBC and CNN, and was just really, politics was not something I really thought was going to be part of my life. And then, of course, the Trump election happened. And the very first actions that I remember Trump taking were the Muslim ban, the trans ban, the harsh rhetoric, and then actions against undocumented immigrants. And I think that hit home for me very personally, because, again, growing up as a Korean American, I grew up in a town called Los Altos in Northern California. We didn't have a lot of Asian families there back then. I had 3 other Asian kids in my class that I remember until maybe like 6th grade. I had no Koreans in my class till 5th grade. No one knew what Korea was back then. I was the second smallest kid in my class. And I think when we talk about what it feels like to be marginalized, to be picked on because of who you are, I've lived that. And I think when Trump went after people because of who they are, because he thought he could go after them, that really sparked something in me. And I found myself out there with the activists protesting. And I've been very politically involved in a lot of ways. I was an election protection monitor 2 times before in 2 election cycles, including being the Mississippi Gulf Coast regional coordinator for election protection for the DSCC in 2012, which was an interesting month I spent down in the Deep South. But I'd never actually gone and protested day after day, protested with undocumented immigrants who were protesting for the DREAM Act, for basic rights, going to my congresswoman's office and whether it's on environment, whether it's standing up against the Muslim ban or so many other things, just found myself out there. And that ended up with me running for politics. And I actually lost to Katie Porter in 2018 in a very close primary. But what I will say is we had the grassroots. And what I learned along the way is I probably now could sell you some magazines. But we also built up a very strong coalition that was able to get me the party endorsement, that was able to, we had hundreds of people knock on doors for my campaign, some diehard people. And after I lost that race, and it was a very bitterly fought race, realized that this was bigger than me. And so the first thing I did was endorse Katie Porter and throw a couple of different major events to try to get all of my supporters lockstep behind her. And I'm proud of the fact that some of Katie Porter's staunchest volunteers and door knockers were people that originally started on my campaign back in 2018. Now, what I'll say is somewhere along the way, I think I realized that we're in a fight. We're in a fight for our core values, a fight for our democracy, a fight for women's reproductive and other rights, a fight for what we hold dear. And at the heart of this, for me, among other things, is just the values that I believe this country stands for, the values that brought my parents to this country. We're at a time right now when diversity, equity, and inclusion have become dirty words to a large segment of the population. But those are the values that brought my parents and so many others like them to this country for hundreds of years. They're literally etched into the Statue of Liberty. Give me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to be free. That is what America has been about. And there are people right now that are trying to deny the essential aspects of America. They're trying to take away public education. They're trying to go after our basic rights. They are trying to get rid of our democracy and our rule of law. We have massive fights ahead of us. And I ended up becoming convinced to run for state senate. We knew my polling was very strong in the region, that I have a uniquely strong profile in this area. I'm happy to discuss in a little bit. And so I ran for state senate, and I first defeated a very strong establishment Democrat, Katrina Foley, in the primary. And she had all the labor, a good part of the party, but we were able to prevail because of the grassroots, because of people like you in my district. We had 1,000 people knock on doors in the primary. And then, of course, we had COVID after that. And we were very much engaged on texting, on phone banking, all of the things that we had to do during that COVID election. But we were able to prevail in the general election. We unseated a Republican, John Morlock, who was seen as an institution in Orange County, had been an elected official for something like 30 years, and no one thought he could be beaten. And we were able to do that and overperform other Democrats quite significantly in that election cycle because of our grassroots powered approach. And I'll just be honest, sitting here last year, I told Josh Newman, my fellow state senator, who had been redistricted into what was mostly my district, about 80% of the new SD-37, which I represent now, after redistricting was my district, 10% was Josh Newman's district, and we thought we were going to run against each other. And I told him I was pretty convinced I was going to keep running for re-election. I had another 8 years after 2024 before my term limits kicked in. I'm able to pass a lot of great legislation in the state Senate. It's a pretty short and easy commute between Irvine and Sacramento. But a funny thing happened over the winter holidays last year. Katie Porter called me. And, we talked pretty regularly, but this was kind of, right after Christmas, and so kind of unusual. And she told me that she was going to be running for the United States Senate, something I think we kind of all guessed she might be doing. But then told me, that she thought I would be the right candidate to try to succeed her. And we chatted for a while, and I don't want to reveal all the aspects of that. But one of the things she made clear was that one of the reasons she felt comfortable running for the United States Senate is because she believed I could win this district. And she believed I was the only person, the only Democrat who could keep this seat blue. And so I thought about it. I talked to my wife. I've got young kids. They're 12, 10, and 7. You can see a picture of them on that Twitter link I sent above where we have our Halloween costumes. But this is important. This seat could well decide control of the House next year. And we have to win back the House next year. And we not only have to win back the House, we have to do more than that. We have to keep this seat and seats like it blue. We have to hold people accountable who want to do harm to our Constitution, to our basic values. And we need to stand up and fight and engage on the battlefield of ideas. Because the time when people from moderate districts like mine, who just went up to Congress or places like that and pretended not to be Democrats, that is a relic of the past. We have right now a limited window, and we cannot continue going down this cycle of back and forth, winning and losing, winning and losing. Every time the Republicans, the MAGA Republicans, take control of institutions like the House, we see how much harm they cause to our institutions. And Donald Trump can never be president of the United States again. And that is why I decided to run for this seat, because it is so, so important that we keep it blue. And after looking at the numbers, and I'll talk about these in a moment, I believe I'm the only Democrat in this race who can win this seat, who can keep it blue, and who will do that while fighting for our democratic values. Now, in the state Senate, and I've only been there 3 years, I have been seen as a champion on gun violence prevention. And you may have seen I made quite a bit of news over the last couple of days because a Trump-appointed judge in Santa Ana, in my area, overturned 2 of my gun violence bills that ended gun shows at the Orange County Fairgrounds, and then another bill that ended gun shows and the sale of guns and ammunition on all state-owned property across the state of California. Now, I'm confident that decision will be overturned. I think this judge wrote a very, very partisan, ideological, and poorly reasoned decision, and I'm very confident that it will be overturned, but it is unfortunate we're facing these fights, that we're facing a judiciary that is stacked with people that want to stop progress, that want to stop state legislatures, federal Congress from solving our basic problems. In the state Senate, I've also been a champion on women's reproductive rights, and I'm proud to enjoy a 100% rating from Planned Parenthood and NARAL. And I was, in fact, the only male elected official who spoke at our pre-Dobbs rally last year when it became apparent that the Supreme Court would overturn Dobbs after that leaked opinion was leaked. I've also been a champion on climate rescue. As Katharine mentioned, I chair the Natural Resources and Water Committee, and that is one of the 3 benchmark climate committees in the state Senate. Have also authored and co-authored a number of key green bills, and proud to say that on all these, and I'll just kind of table this because I realize we're nearing time here. I have been proud to be the outlier among Orange County elected officials, and you can look at my record here and say that on all these issues and on labor issues, Dave Min has been uniquely aggressive and progressive in this regard. Now, going into next year's election, I'm proud to say that we just won the Democratic Party's endorsement vote, winning over 70% of the pre-endorsement vote. I've been proud to be endorsed by labor and to be the clear candidate of labor. Every single labor organization that has endorsed in my race has endorsed for me. There's one that dual endorsed, primarily because I didn't get my questionnaire back in time. But I'm proud to be endorsed by teachers, by SEIU, by the California School Employees Association, the laborers, the communication workers, and many, many others. I think we have the momentum to win this race, and Katie Porter's endorsement, of course, is the most important one we can enjoy. But this is about something much bigger than me and my race. This is about a concerted effort. So thank you guys for what you're doing to try to take back our House, to win over all of these swing seats. I know with grassroots support, we can do this. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you have. Thank you for having me here today, and appreciate the conversation that I know is coming.
Thank you. Thanks for that great opening statement. Can you tell us about your district? You know, we have a bunch of activists on this call. What should we understand about CA-47 that we may not know from being in other parts of California?
Yep. And so I represent right now over 80% of the district, as you mentioned. And so the cities in this district are Irvine, Costa Mesa, Laguna Beach, Newport Beach, Huntington Beach, and Seal Beach. And I represent all those cities except for Seal Beach. And I think there's a misimpression that this is somehow like a MAGA area. And that's because every time you see news about a KKK rally in California, it's in Huntington Beach. And that is my district. I also represent Orange, which means Orange Unified School District, which has been banning books, is part of the district. So, you know, I've been dealing with a lot of MAGA efforts in my district, to be honest. But that is not the majority of the people in my district by far. This is an affluent, well-educated, and very diverse district. It's 45% non-white, maybe higher if you count Arab Americans and Iranian Americans, who are substantial and maybe make up as much as 5% of my district, and don't get counted in the census as anything other than Caucasian. So it's educated, it's diverse, the people moving in, and we have some of the fastest growing populations in Irvine and Costa Mesa in the country, tend to be exacerbating some of those trends. They really are more educated, more diverse. They enjoy banh mi's and Korean barbecue as much as they might like a burger or a vegan burger or whatever. And that is changing a lot of things here. The other thing probably that is important is that there's a lot of what I call Mitt Romney Republicans out here. They're not Trumpers, they're Romney people. And actually the most Republican city in my district is not Huntington Beach, it's Newport Beach. And frankly, we'll be lucky to get over 30% of the vote there. That's just the way Newport's made up. In a good year, I might get over 40% of the vote in Huntington. In a really good year, maybe over 45%. But the key to winning down here is to win over voters in Irvine, which is the largest city with 300,000 people. 40% of Democratic voters reside in Irvine. We turn out at a high rate, by the way. Everybody in my district tends to vote. We have over 80% turnout in presidential elections. That's not going to be the problem. Now, one of the misconceptions about my district is that you need to win over coastal white women to try to win. And no offense to anyone in this Zoom that fits that category. I'm married to a coastal white woman myself, but that is not a swing vote at this point. Anyone who thinks that abortion is a key issue has already decided next year how they're going to vote and if they're going to vote. And so when we talk about the swing votes out here, they are the 25% of voters that identify as Asian American or Pacific Islander. And then it is also about turning out the youth vote. With the Asian vote, we know they're going to vote. It's about persuasion. With the youth vote, it's about trying to get them to turn out. And I'll just say there were some massive voter suppression efforts last year at UC Irvine, which is the largest university in my district. We are well aware of those. We've been working closely with key players at UCI to make sure that doesn't happen again. We'll also be amping up turnout or trying to at the community colleges in my district, and there's 4 major ones. But help there would be very much appreciated in the general election, trying to get those votes out. Now, on the Asian vote, I think I have a natural appeal there. There is a last name effect, and it's particularly pronounced with my last name because I'm Korean, but Min could also be Chinese or Vietnamese. Those happen to be the 3 largest API populations in my district. So you can think of me like Kobe Bryant. I'm a triple threat here, and do believe that we overperform with those groups. But I think also my bio speaks well to those, and we know that because we've tested it. You know, without patting myself on the back, I've gone to good schools. I've had a history of public service and of strong academic and career performance. These are things that voters in my district care about. And then now I have a legislative record that I think is one that speaks to this district. Now, not everyone in this Zoom is going to appreciate where I've come out, but as I mentioned, I'm among the most progressive legislators in the state on climate, on gun violence prevention, on women's reproductive rights, on standing with the LGBTQ plus community, and many, many other issues. I have been more moderate on taxes. And in fact, I've only voted to raise 1 tax in my time in the Senate. And that is the tax on guns and ammunition that passed last year. And in fact, I was the deciding vote for that bill. I also am seen as more moderate on public safety. And again, I know this can be divisive within our Democratic Party and our family, but my district, that's really important. And in fact, I just picked up the endorsement of PORAC, the Police Officers Research Association in California, last week. And I will tell you, I believe that's the biggest single endorsement any Democrat could possibly have in a district like mine, because when I hear from my constituents, within typically 15 seconds, I hear about homelessness and rising crime as the top issues that they're concerned about. And I know that as Democrats, we're going to take a lot of flack for that. Those are going to be the biggest hits we know are coming next year. So I think we've got a good pathway to victory. But we got to win over those Asian communities. We know the Republican attacks on places like WeChat, Kakao Talk, these social media channels that are in language. They did this successfully in the Jay Chen campaign last year. We've got to watch out for that. That's also something we're aware of is it's not just what you see on TV and radio. It's the stuff underneath. And the Republicans have become very, very good at messaging through those channels.
Thank you for that. I'll just mention Indivisible South Bay, LA, knocked on doors for Jay Chen last cycle, and we saw exactly what you were talking about. It was very disappointing. Anyway, next question. We know that your opponent is very, very likely to be Scott Baugh. He is a Republican with experience in both Sacramento and Orange County. He is as right-wing as it comes. How do you beat him? And I will also add to that question because someone mentioned in the chat, Katie Porter won last time, but it felt like a little bit of a squeaker, more than a lot of us would have liked. So what's the strategy to beat your opponent?
Katie Porter spent something like, I hear different figures, 22 million, 29 million, a lot of money to win last year. And Katie Porter is really famous. Like just, it is crazy how famous she is. Razor sharp wit. I'm a pretty funny guy, I think, but I'm a little more low key. She's got charm. I don't have any of those things. And so we have to work with what I've got. And I'm not going to have $30 million or $25 million to spend. I'm not going to have her brand name. But as someone who lives in the district, who saw the messaging last year, who was talking with Katie and trying to work with her to support her, I will tell you that she spent a lot of time, effort, and money reaching out to the API community last year to try to message back against the Republican hits that she was anti-business and anti-police. And you may remember in the second point that the Irvine mayor leaked some texts to Fox News that made Katie seem anti-police. And those were totally unfair hits. She's not anti-business. Oversight does not mean you're anti-business. And she's not anti-police. As far as I'm aware, the police folks who track this stuff have told me she's been very much someone who supports law enforcement with her votes. But those were the reputational hits she had to fight back against. I think I'm starting on better footing in some ways with those groups, partially because of how I look. Look, I'm an Asian guy in a tie. People are going to assume I'm more moderate, regardless of what my stances are, right? I think also having the police behind me will help. And of course, as I mentioned, being Asian American and getting out in those communities is really, really going to help. And we've got a lot of support, a lot of allies. I helped pass that API equity budget last year. I've spoken at more than 150 or participated in 150 rallies, events, Zooms, et cetera, related to anti-Asian hate. I've co-authored or authored 5 major pieces of Asian hate legislation. I'm someone who's visible in our community. I think we're going to have a stronger foundation to get those votes out. And look, we know the hits are coming. And I'll just say we have Scott Baugh as well, because we know some of the messages already that we're going to hit him with. And in fact, if you saw, we were able to get placed in conjunction with the DCCC, a piece where Scott Baugh, speaking before a very right-wing evangelical Christian group, said that wokeism is the biggest threat America's ever faced, bigger than 9/11, bigger than World War II, bigger than the Civil War. That's a quote. And we found that quote through some of our activists. And we sent that to the D-Trip and worked with them to get that placed. And we were able to respond to that. We know that's something we'll be able to use. Scott Baugh wants to paint himself as a moderate, but we've got the receipts and we're going to show people just how extreme he is.
Great. Thank you. So we only have about 15 minutes left. I'm hoping we can do sort of rapid fire from here on. That's okay. We want to get in lots of information. So there are 2 issues that have come up about you that I think we want to hear from you about. One is that last May you were pulled over for DUI and you pled no contest to a misdemeanor. You are serving 3 years probation. The second is that when you were a professor at UC Irvine, you advised a chapter of the Federalist Society at the law school. Both of those are, I think are issues that concern activists. So what should we know about those issues?
I'll address the second one first. On the Federalist Society, maybe I shouldn't say this in something that will be published, but the dirty secret about UC Irvine Law School when I was there is we didn't really have any conservative professors. And so I was the second advisor to the Federalist Society. The first was Erwin Chemerinsky, the dean. And so Erwin asked me if I would take over that duty. The Federalist Society didn't have an advisor. There were like 3 of them. So I agreed to sign on to a piece of paper so that they could have a club. And I stand by that decision because I believe in freedom of expression in a marketplace of ideas. That's how I taught my classes. And for those of you who are familiar with academic settings, we want to have that robust dialogue. And I think that's something. I hate the term cancel culture, but I do think there is a tendency right now to want to stamp out opposing views rather than hearing them out. And I think that exchange of ideas is important. That's why I agreed to do it. And I stand by that decision. By the way, it was well known at the time how liberal I was because I'd come from Schumer and Cap. They didn't come to me because I was a conservative. They came to me because I was very, very political. And even though it was in contrast to their own views, they needed an advisor, and they thought since I was the politically active professor on campus, they should come to me. Again, I was a Democrat who'd worked for Schumer and Cap. I was very active in the Democratic Party at the time. So that's on that. On the DUI, I will just say it was the worst mistake of my life. And I want to apologize to everyone on this call for that mistake. It was a dumb mistake. I think I just forgot my role as a role model, as someone who just needs to make smart decisions. And that's all I can say on that. I will just add that personally, it was the most humbling experience of my life. My kids were coming home from school talking about it because their friends had seen it. I wouldn't wish this on anybody. And I don't mean to make this about me, but I was in the news every day. People were trying to use it for their own political purposes. I was receiving phone calls from my friends who'd gotten calls from some of my political rivals. Have you seen this video? Have you heard about Dave Min? It was tough. And I was a state senator. I had to walk into rooms. I had to go present myself, knowing that everyone was talking about me. And it was tough, but I'm trying to learn from it. I stopped drinking, at least through the duration of this campaign, maybe longer. And just to be clear, I've never had any incidents with alcohol before. I will never again. This was a dumb mistake. Now, that being said, I know the question here is viability. And I'll just tell you a quick anecdote. The morning after I had the DUI, I called first my wife, then I called my consultants. I called the DCCC and I told them, if this particular incident makes me not viable and there's another candidate who is viable, I will drop out. I then called my pollster. My pollster is David Binder, legendary pollster, polled for Obama, polls for Katie Porter. And I asked him, David, do I need to drop out? What's the issue? How much damage is this going to cause me? And his answer, I remember, very much stuck with me. He said, look, we want to poll this district because I've never polled this district on this, but I have seen this arise a number of times in my career. I have never once seen it impact the outcome of an election. So we'll want to poll your district, but if you're asking me what my gut prediction is, it will not impact your race. Well, we did poll it 2 months later, and that's exactly what we found. And in fact, after we tested the negatives, my negative versus Scott Baugh's main negative, which is that he was indicted for 20 plus counts of campaign finance, fraud, and related charges, I went up from being +4 to +7 after that. And in fact, I am the only candidate in this race, and I've been in a number of forums, at candidate debates, etc., who is talking about how I can win, who is presenting evidence that shows I can win. So when we talk about viability, it's brought up a lot in my race. But I will just say, I apologize. It will never happen again. But a DUI is not disqualifying. And if your only argument is that the other candidate has a DUI and I don't, that's not a convincing argument for your own viability.
Thank you. Thanks for addressing those tough issues. So next question, the Republicans in the House just elected a far-right speaker, Mike Johnson. He is an election denier, and he is not someone we can trust to uphold democracy. We're also spiraling under the weight of so many other undemocratic forces like gerrymandering, the Electoral College, et cetera. What is the path forward out of this anti-democracy spiral we find ourselves in?
Like I said before, we have to elect Democrats. We have to not just win the House, but have a longer strategy of keeping the House, of not just winning seats like mine, but keeping them blue. And we need to elect candidates who are willing to stand up for our values, because we can't just have people that go up and do that old blue dog thing. We have to fight for our values. We're facing generational challenges around things like climate change, loss of economic opportunity, the huge costs that young people face in trying to do family formation and starting their careers, huge challenges. We're facing a fifth column right now of insurrectionists who want to undo everything this country stands for. So this is not a time for us to be shy. We have to engage. We need fighters up there. And I think that's one thing Katie Porter and I share very much in common, is we're both fighters who are willing to go out and engage really hard.
Thank you. What about the Supreme Court? You have a background as an attorney. Obviously, the ethics of the court are out of control, but there are also lots of ideas on the table for how to reform the court. What are you in favor of?
I think Justice Gorsuch penned an op-ed saying that there's no oversight of the Supreme Court, and that is totally wrong. I will just say that you have 3 members of this court who committed perjury before the Senate Judiciary Committee in saying that they respected Roe v. Wade, they would uphold it as precedent, and clearly they did not mean that. You have at least 1 member who's committing gross corruption, pay to play, or the appearance of, and lying about their disclosures. So we have a crisis on our hands. We have a Supreme Court that is ideologically extreme, does not obey precedent, does not follow the rule of law, is legislating from the bench, which is also made up of radical right-wing ideologues who are getting paid by billionaires. One of the things I would consider doing is expanding the court. 9 is not a number that's sacrosanct, and traditionally the number of justices has matched the number of circuits. Well, we have 11 circuits right now. Why not 11 justices, particularly given the games that Mitch McConnell played in violating every norm out there to try to get his people onto the bench. I would also support in the House potentially defunding the Supreme Court. unless and until they agree to binding codes of ethics and perhaps more. I do not think Clarence Thomas should be sitting on the highest court in this land. He should be in prison under indictment at the very least. Until we can get some action on this outrageous activity and behavior, we have to open up every tool in our toolkit right now. And I think one of the things we do have is the power of the purse, and we can defund the Supreme Court and grind them to a halt. And this option has not been discussed enough, but it should be taken seriously because it is one tool that we know we have.
Thank you. So foreign policy is an area that probably does not come as naturally to you just because it's not in your background, but the world is on fire. We have Ukraine and Russia, and now we have a war in the Middle East. What are people in your district talking to you about, if anything, about sort of foreign policy? And if they're not talking to you about that, how do you speak to them about why these issues actually matter to them?
Yeah, and I think in my lifetime, I think, I opposed the Iraq War, by the way. I should just say that I remember marching with my then girlfriend, now wife, in a protest in New York where we were living at the time against that. And I did not see the evidence tying Iraq to the attacks on us on 9/11. I do believe that a country has the right to go after those who would attack it to try to keep its citizens safe. I do believe in American exceptionalism, and that's partially because of who I am and my own background. As I mentioned, the Korean War is kind of a formative event in my family's history. And that was an example where I think America really did make an entire civilization better. And I take that to heart. I think we can do good. We do stand for values that people around the world care about. And I know that's controversial, but that's my own view, that democracy, opportunity, liberal values of self-actualization, those are important values. And they've served as a beacon to so many around the world. And they continue to serve as a beacon, even despite Donald Trump's efforts to snuff those out. So I think at the end of the day, we can do good, and we should try to be good out there. And we should recognize the limitations on our own power. But when we have atrocities happen, as happened in Ukraine, for example, we have an obligation to try to prevent those. My heart breaks right now over with the news coming out of Gaza. Before that, it broke over just the horrific evil we saw come out of the Hamas attacks on Israel. And look, I'm simple. I wish for a peaceful world in which people could just kind of be who they want to be, become who they want to become, and love who they want to love. And unfortunately, there are many reactionary forces around the world that I think we have to sometimes fight against to create the world that we all believe we belong in.
Great, thank you. You already touched on Dobbs and abortion. Do voters
just
in your
add to that really quickly on Dobbs? I think we need a broader strategy. I've been talking with my Planned Parenthood affiliates, and I think we have to start thinking about more impact litigation and passing laws that might get struck down. And that's just something that we ought to adopt, the same tools that the Republicans did for really 20, 30 years. They had a successful playbook, and if something's successful, we don't like the result, but the process worked. We need to start doing the same thing. It's going to be probably a decade or longer before we can start taking back control of the judiciary. But in the meantime, what we can do is create a fast lane for overturning those laws as quickly as possible, either by creating favorable precedents or by showing the fallacy of the logic of these courts, these jokers that are on the Supreme Court.
Okay. Last question. Do voters talk to you about Trump, about his pending trials, about the general dysfunction of the party, or are voters mostly focused on policy concerns, kitchen table issues? And if they do talk to you about Trump, what do you say to them?
So I talk right now because I'm in the primary stage of the election. I talk mostly to Democratic activists, and they all talk about Trump. That is the number one thing. When I talk to my friends and neighbors and colleagues who are not as politically engaged, some of them do need convincing of the threat that this man and his movement pose. And so I see a mix. People believe in democracy. People want that. They believe in our core values, but at the same time, kitchen table issues are the first thing people care about. Who's going to put food on my table? Who's going to rein in the price of things at the grocery store or the Target or whatever? So those are real. And we as Democrats have to realize we've got a lot of challenges in front of us, but we won't have the ability politically to address any of them if we don't win elections. And a big part of what we have to do is to make sure the economy works well for working people. And that I'm proud to have labor behind me because I think we need to rebalance our economy. I'm proud to be the candidate of working people in this race because working people have gotten the short shrift for the last 30 years. But yeah, we got a ton ahead of us. We just have to keep fighting on multiple fronts.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you attending tonight. Thanks to your campaign manager as well, Dan Driscoll. And I think that's a wrap.
Hey, thank you, everybody. Look forward to maybe seeing you around. And thank you so much for taking the time to hear me out. And let's go turn the house blue next year, regardless of whether it's me or anyone else. This is a team project. We've got to kill this. We need to take back the house.